I'm going to talk to Nick Horton here in just a second, who is the editor, owner, main bottle washer for Opportunity Arkansas. And if you heard last hour's show, you heard State Senators Hammer and Johnson talk about the Board of Corrections and what's going on with that. I talked to the governor about it today on the show. You heard what she had to say about that. And I asked both the senators the same question. Is this a state constitutional crisis? And they both said, yes, it is. So Nick is listening right now. He's on the phone. He's joining us today by phone. Nick, do you think we're into a state constitutional crisis?
Boy, I don't know. I certainly hope not, but it seems more and more as time goes on here that's more and more the case. I definitely think it's a crisis. I don't know whether it's a constitutional crisis, but I think it's certainly a crisis at this point. And look, the Board of Corrections clearly thinks that they are autonomous and completely unaccountable to the people of Arkansas, the people's elected officials in Arkansas. And unfortunately, to some degree, I guess they're right because they're not elected. They're appointed to 7-year terms. They don't have any term limits. They are, and there is a provision in the state constitution for them to be removed and impeached from the Board of Corrections, but they have to consent to that. A majority of the Board of Corrections has to agree to have one of their members removed, so they're not accountable to the governor. In that sense, because the governor can remove them, but then they have to consent to it. And then now, they're making the legal argument using our own tax dollars against us in the court system, clogging up the court system, arguing that they're not accountable to the legislature either. So it seems to me, we basically have a shadow government operating in the state of Arkansas and doing whatever the heck they want. And, maybe that would be fine if they were keeping us safe, but look at the results. Look at the product of their work over the last 10, 15, 20 years. They have completely failed to keep the state of Arkansas safe, and something has to change.
Yeah, that's something that Senator Hammer brought up, saying that if you want all this power, you got to take the slings and the arrows of how well have you run the prison system. And I think most people that have been following this for any length of time, and I know I have, as far as how many county jails are full of state prisoners and things of that nature, that they have not run the prison system not only correctly, but they've abysmally run it.
That's right, and it's a great point. They clearly want all of the authority and all of the power, but none of the responsibility or the ownership for the results of their policy decisions. And that's a pretty big problem. I think this whole thing, look, if Senator Hammer or Senator Johnson or Senator whoever was responsible for what's been going on in our prison system and in our state in terms of our crime crisis over the last 10 to 15 years, they'd be thrown out on their rear ends. They would all be thrown out of office. But the reason there haven't been any consequences, and frankly there haven't been any changes, is because we have this rogue, unaccountable board of corrections bureaucrats that think they're completely not only above the law, but outside the law. They think they just get to do whatever they want to do, and that there's no repercussions. And again, to some degree they're right, because the way it's set up is so broken. They're not accountable, they're not elected, they're not term limited, and they can just do whatever they want to do. And it's a major problem. And look, I see this stuff. I see these, there's some of these Democrat state senators, the few that are left, that are out on social media talking about how, well, this is the way it's supposed to be. This is the way it was designed. The Board of Corrections is supposed to be independent and autonomous and outside of political influence. In what universe does that work? Clearly it's not working. But in what other facet of life do we say, well, there should be no political, there should be no accountability, there should be no incentive or disincentive for these people to do the right thing or the wrong thing. They should just be completely independent and do whatever the heck they want, and the rest of us just have to deal with the consequences. That's not how human nature works. It's not how the private sector works. Frankly, it's not how any of the rest of state government works. Because whether you're in a state agency or the legislature or even a judicial position, you're accountable to someone. Mm-hmm. You're accountable to the person who appointed you, who's accountable to the voters, or you're accountable to the voters directly. There's nowhere else that I've found anywhere else in state government where you have this system of people who just completely find themselves outside of any direct accountability. And we're seeing the results of that.
Okay, so I'm glad to have you on today because we've talked about, commissions and boards for a long time now. I talked to Hammer and Johnson, and both of them say things will have to be shook out in the court first before they can decide or the governor decides whether they're going to have a special session or use a 2/3 vote of the House and to the state Senate and bring it up in the time that they're going to meet here shortly. It won't be it's in February. So when you look at this, what do you think is going to have to be done? Are we going to have to go in and change the whole tenor of this argument about boards and commissions and the best way I can put that, strip them of some of this power that they've been accumulating up over the years?
Yeah, I think this is pretty simple in terms of what needs to happen with the Board of Corrections. They need to be accountable to the people and to the elected officials who represent the people, just like every other part of state government. So they need to have, I think, shortened terms so that, you've got a situation right now where you have a chairman of the Board of Corrections who was reappointed by Governor Hutchinson in his last couple years in office. Well, he now gets a 7-year term. And so, Governor Sanders, God willing, is elected to a second term, she's still going to be dealing with this guy from, years and years and years ago. He's still going to be on the Board of Corrections. He's been there for over 20 years already. So I think there need to be shorter terms so that these folks are more accountable to our elected officials who represent us. I think there need to be term limits. I think there need to be some changes, some clarifications made to Amendment 33 of the state constitution, because it's given the Board of Corrections the impression that here's what this all comes down to in terms of the legal argument. And I'm not a lawyer. I didn't stay at Holiday Inn Express last night. But I have guest hosted the Dave Elswick show, and so I think that makes me an expert on those things. But here's what it really comes down to is Amendment 33 of the state constitution essentially says power given to the board cannot be taken away. That's a layman's way of understanding it. Mm-hmm. The board is arguing that means any power that's ever given to them at any point ever can never, ever, for any reason at any point in the future, be taken away. A more reasonable position, which I think is what most reasonable people that I've talked to tend to think and tend to agree with, including some actual lawyers, is that when Amendment 33 was passed 100 years ago, that language referred to the rights and the power that the Board of Corrections had at that time and solidified those powers at that time. But it wasn't something that was in perpetuity for the rest of time in history. No changes could ever be made to the Board of Corrections forever and ever, amen. That doesn't really seem to make a lot of logical sense. And again, most reasonable people agree. But the board's position is, no. There's this amendment that was passed 100 years ago, and it says that any powers that you give us can never be rescinded. So their interpretation is, if the legislature 100 years ago told the Board of Corrections, they could all buy themselves a pony, no future legislature can ever come back. No voters, nothing else can ever come back and take that power away, save a constitutional amendment. I don't think that is very reasonable. I don't think that's really what the intent of that amendment was. And again, I don't think most reasonable people agree with that. But that's the crux of their legal argument. So that can be settled in the courts. A judge or the Supreme Court can come in and clarify that pretty quickly. Or we can amend the state constitution and say, you know what, we're not going to have this power struggle for the next 20, 30, 100 years. We're going to make this really clear. As you mentioned, 2/3 of the legislature can amend the state constitution, or they can put something out before the voters and let the voters weigh in. But there's got to be some clarity here, because this is what they've continued to fall back on for years and years and years now, and say, nope, you can't tell us what to do. We're completely autonomous, because you gave us some power at one point, and now you're never allowed to take it back. And I don't think that's not good policy. Clearly, even if they are to win somehow on the legal argument, it's clearly not worked, and so something has to be changed.
Yeah, I agree, and it seemed that to me, with the two state senators I had on today, it's just a matter of time. They're waiting for the stuff legally to shake out. How ridiculous that the AG has to sue the Board of Corrections, and the Board of Corrections is basically suing the AG to try to get this stuff worked out. They're using our own tax money against us to sue the state of Arkansas. And by the way, the bills that they're challenging, the Protect Arkansas Act in particular, it passed overwhelmingly in both chambers of the legislature. Yes.
Super majority support, bipartisan support. This wasn't just a Republican bill or a conservative conspiracy of some sort. There were Democrat legislators that voted for this bill, and the elected voice and representatives of the people passed this overwhelmingly, sent it to the governor's desk. It was signed. It became law. And you know what's really interesting? It became law and was signed. It was supposed to go into effect on January 1, but almost 9 months went by before the board decided that they were going to challenge this. What took so long? I mean, they knew for 9 months that this was coming down the pike, and they waited until 2-3 weeks before Christmas, before the end of the year, to blow this whole thing up. Perhaps while they assumed people weren't paying attention during the holidays, I don't know. But now we've got this limbo situation where we had a really strong, super strong criminal reform bill that was desperately needed. Senator Ben Gilmore, Representative Gazaway spent months and months working on this, talking to law enforcement, talking to prosecutors, talking to crime victims. They put this massive bill together, did a ton of legwork to educate the public and their colleagues, and got majority support. And then the Board of Corrections, 7 people come in and decide, you know what, we don't like it, and we're not going to adhere to it. And then on top of it, they fired the head of the Department of Corrections. That's right. Over what? Over nothing. I mean, they can't articulate a single thing other than they think he should report to them, and they think that he's an ally of the governor, and he wants to change some stuff. And they don't want to let that happen because they want to be the ones that decide how all of this works. They don't like his attitude, basically. I had a piece in the Democrat Gazette the Friday before Christmas that said, basically, they fired him because they don't like his attitude, and they think they should be the ones that get to decide this stuff. Well, they've been deciding it for 100 years, and they have failed every single step of the way. I agree. Nick, thanks for the time. I appreciate it. If folks want to read the articles on Opportunity Arkansas's website, where do they go? OpportunityArkansas.org. We've been covering this almost daily over the last couple of weeks, and we're going to continue to do that because I think this is one of the most, aside from education freedom and getting rid of our state income tax, I think this is one of the most critical things facing our state in the next 2 or 3 years, and so we're going to continue to focus on this and make sure it gets fixed. Fantastic. We'll talk to you in the near future. Nick Horton here on the Dave Elswick Show. Thanks so much, Nick.